Hey, what's up everyone, Twif here again, and this time I am making a more in-depth presentation of my Poison Spark Occultist build, as it seems to be getting a lot of attention lately. So in this video I will first talk about the core mechanic of the build and show you the things you will need to get in order to make the build work properly. Then in a second time I will present my personal gear and give you some explanation about it. Then I will show you my passive skill tree and talk about the jewel as well. And lastly, I will show you my gem setup. First of all, you need to achieve 100% lightning to chaos damage conversion, as you need chaos damage to poison enemies. In order to get this, you will need two things. The Phantasmal Spark alternate quality gem that will convert 40% of lightning damage to chaos, and then an Ashes of the Star amulet with a 30% to quality of all skill gem rolls. Then you will need to get 100% chance to poison enemies on hit with Spark, and to achieve this you will need a Divergent Herald of Agony skill gem. It will already give you 70% chance to poison enemies on hit with the Ashes of the Star amulet again. Then you will get another 10% from the passive skill tree with chance to poison with spells. And for the remaining 20% you will want to get the cluster notable septic spells, which will give you 20% chance to poison on hit with spell damage. You can find this notable on a medium cluster jewel with chaos damage over time. To make the build feel good, you will also need a way to pierce enemies. I would say at least 2 or 3 pierce is a good starting point, and here are a few ways to get some pierce. The best way is probably an Eldritch pair of gloves with the pierced implicits from the Eater of Worlds. Then you can also craft on the gloves and or the helmet the prefix projectile pierce an additional target. You can also get pierce on boots like me, but it is insanely expensive and I would definitely not recommend it unless you are on an Uber budget. As the build is using a Phantasmal Spark version, it means that you cannot get extra projectiles from the other alternate quality gem, so it is very important that you get a helmet with Spark fires 3 additional projectiles. And lastly, if you want your damage to feel good, you will need a way to apply Wither to enemies. For this there are 3 main ways to apply it. The easiest one is probably the Withering Step gem. It can apply up to 7 stacks instantly at level 21 gem, or up to 11 stacks if you are using the Anomalous alternate quality gem with Ashes of the Star. You can also apply it through a Wither totem setup if you have the gem slots for it, with spell totem support and Wither. This will probably be more of a starter version or during early stages of the build, as it will take too many gem slots at later stage. And lastly, if you manage to find or get one at some point, a Glorious Vanity jewel will be very nice with the Ritual of Shadow notables, which wither enemies on hit. It is very powerful and it shouldn't be too hard to get, as we are not using the keystone from the jewel. That means that you can roll any Glorious Vanity jewel and it doesn't have to be sacrificed in the name of a specific one. And a last little important thing is to apply the Despair curse somehow, so most likely it will be through a Hunter ring with the Despair enemies on hit mod, or early on you can just self-cast it if you want. Alright, let's now take a look at my personal gear. And let's begin with my wand. For this build, it is very important to know that spell damage doesn't work to increase your poison damage. Therefore, a profane wand is the best base, as it gives cast speed with its implicit. For the prefix, the best mod is increased lightning damage. You want to get the best roll you can find for this mod. Then you will look for flat lightning damage to spells, level of all lightning skill gem, or level of all spell skill gems. If you could get +1 to level of all spell kill gems instead of the flat lightning damage to spells, it would be the best, but it is also a lot harder to craft. Then for the suffixes you want chaos damage over time multiplier, increased cast speed, and depending on if you are playing Mistress of Sacrifice Forbidden Jewels or not, you will need the spell trigger mod to proc Desecrate and Bone Offering. If you are not using the Mistress of Sacrifice Forbidden Jewels, then you can probably replace the trigger mod with projectile speed. It would be a very good quality of life change. For the amulet we are using an Ashes of the Star Onyx amulet, anointed with Charisma, and it is very important that you get plus 30% to quality of all skill gems in order to achieve the 100% lightning to chaos damage conversion. So you need this to have a perfect quality of all skill gems roll. For the helmet, I am using an Eldritch Hubris circlet with increased mana reservation efficiency and cast speed as implicits. It is also very important to get the Spark enchant. Spark fires 3 additional projectiles to make the build feel a lot better. Then we are just looking for high energy shield as prefixes, and for the suffixes, if you can get the Veil modifier increased duration of ailments while focused, it will be a very nice DPS boost against bosses especially. Now, if I were to recraft my helmet, I would probably do it with essences instead, with the deafening essence of lotting to get the suffix mod, increased mana reservation efficiency of skills. And if you happen to have an open prefix, you can also craft on the bench, projectile pierce an additional target. For the shield, I am using an Aegis Aurora Champion Kite shield. It is a very powerful unique shield that a lot of build uses right now. It gives a good chance to block, and it gives you a bunch of energy shield every time you block based on your maximum armor. It also gives a bunch of maximum cold resistance, which is good to synergize with the new Melding of the Flesh Cobalt Jewel. For the body armor, I am using an Eldritch Grasping Mail with chance to block attack damage and maximum cold resistance implicit, again to synergize with the Melding of the Flesh Jewel. If you can get your hands on chest with increased global defenses, it will be a very good defensive boost, but it is not absolutely required. You can instead get a Val Regalia with very high energy shield, it will do the work too. Just try to get the highest amount of ES possible as the prefixes, and for the suffixes you can look for intelligence or any resistances, or even life regen could be very useful. For the rings, I am using 2 Yolit rings that I crafted with essences of Delirium for the damage over time multiplier suffix. Then one of them has the minimum frenzy charge and charge on kill to generate some frenzy charges, and the last suffix I reforged speed for cast speed. The other ring is the same with intelligence instead of the frenzy mod. Then for the prefixes we are just looking for the increased energy shield from Crusader, and then you can finish the ring with some flat energy shield or some reduced mana cost, it could be useful too. For the gloves, I am using a pair of Hands of the High Templar Crusader gloves with Despair and Temporal Chain on it, with some very nice other implicit mods, and the only reason I am running this pair of gloves is because I have an elevated pierce mod on my boots, but I would definitely not recommend running these gloves unless you have a pair of boots like this. But you will most likely use a pair of rare gloves, which is an apothecary's gloves. It is the best armor and ES base, and you will look as the prefixes for maximum energy shield and armor, and if you have an open prefix you can craft projectile pierce an additional target, and then for the suffixes you can look for intelligence to get more ES, or some resistances if you need it, and most importantly try to get the Veil modifier, increased attack and cast speed while focused. It gives up to 50% cast speed, it is very insane. You will want this pair of gloves to be Eldritch as well, with the Searing Exarch implicit chaos damage over time multiplier, and for the Eater of World implicit, you will want projectile pierce 2 additional targets. So for the boots, I am using a 2-toned pair of boots with evasion and energy shield base, so this is not the best base. The best would be to have armor and energy shield base, but this is the best I could find with the mods I wanted. So I have elevated pierce as my prefix, then I have elevated tailwind and elevated onslaught as my suffixes, but this is an insane pair of boots, and again I wouldn't recommend trying to craft this, it would cost way too much. So what could you replace this pair of boots with? Well, it's basically exactly the same pair, but instead of the projectile pierce 5 additional target mod, you just replace this with elusive on kill. It is basically the pair of boots that every critical strike build uses, and it will be a lot cheaper. Now, as we have just seen before, you will most likely get pierce on your gloves instead, and therefore you will also need to get one of your rings to have despair on hit. For the belt, I am using a Mage Blood right now just because I have it, and it is a very nice quality of life belt, but the build will work for sure with another rare belt instead, so you can get a Stygian Vise or a Crystal belt, and you will just look for prefixes with like flat energy shield with increased maximum energy shield, and you can also like some armor as prefixes, and then for the suffixes you just want some intelligence or fill up your resistances and eventually get some influence modifier like cast speed during flask effect or some stuff like this. Quickly going over my flask setup, so it will be a bit different if you are not using Mage Blood, and I will tell you what you can get. But now my flask setup is increased effect and increased armor for the Basalt flask, then a Quicksilver flask with immune to bleed and corrupted blood. Then we have a Granite flask with reduced mana cost of skills during flask effect. And I have a Silver flask just to have onslaught all the time with reduced effect of curses. Now, if you are not using Mage Blood, the flask setup will be pretty much the same, you just don't get the enchantment and you replace the prefix increased effect with the Flagellant mod, which is gain charges when you are hit by an enemy. This way your charges will be up most of the time. And the only flask I would replace in this setup is the Silver flask, as you get it onslaught from the boots anyway. And you can replace this flask with whichever you prefer, so it can be a Sulfur flask for Consecrated Ground for some damage and some life regen, it could be a Quartz flask if you don't like to get stuck, and it could be some Elemental flask or even another unique flask if you like. Let's now take a look at the passive skill tree and all of the jewels that I'm using in this build. So first of all, I am going on the right side of the witch to grab this jewel socket for my Glorious Vanity, and here I have the Ritual of Shadows notable. So again, this is not absolutely required, you can also get some Anomalous Withering Step or some Withering Totem setup to wither enemies on hit instead. Then we are heading up on the top right of the tree to get some mana reservation efficiency. The poison wheel with the poison on hit, which is very important to cap your chance to poison enemies. Then you get chaos inoculation, and then we get our first large cluster. So all of the large cluster will be the same. It is 3% increased attack and cast speed with lightning skills, with 35% increased effect, and then try to get some energy shield, some elemental resistances, or some attributes on it. And then we will socket in those some small cluster jewels with 35% increased effect to get some mana reservation efficiency, and then try to get again some attributes, resistances and energy shield on those as best as you can. Then we are heading to this jewel socket, and here I put my Melding of the Flesh jewel. So this does elemental resistances are capped by your highest maximum elemental resistance instead. So that means if one of your resistance is 90%, then all of your other resistances will be capped at maximum 90%. So in this case we are using maximum cold res on the chest with maximum cold res on the Aegis Aura shield as well as Purity of Ice, and with that we reach up to 90% cold res, and therefore our fire and lightning res are also 90% maximum. And I am just getting here mana mastery with 10% reduced mana cost of skills, because spark cost a lot of mana, and here we get chance to block spell damage. Then we are heading to the left, and here are some very important notables, like the corruption one and the chaos mastery for more wither effect. This is a ton of DPS. Then we also have acrimony, which is damage over time multiplier. Again, this is a lot of DPS, and the damage over time mastery is very nice. Increased skill effect duration, which increased the duration of spark, so it lasts longer, and increased duration of ailments on enemies, so this increased the duration of poison. And most importantly, we grab the elemental overload. So whenever you deal a critical strike, then you will deal 40% more elemental damage with hits and ailments. So we have about 10% chance to deal a crit, and then we gain a bunch of elemental damage, which is converted to chaos. Then heading up we have this shield mastery to get some more chance to block, with Arcane Guarding to get some block spells as well as ES from the shield, and then we have another large cluster, so this is again the same as before. The small cluster is always the same, And then here I have a Megalomaniac Jewel with Septic Spells, Eternal Suffering and Mystical Ward for some extra block chance. But you don't need to have a Megalomaniac Jewel, you can just replace this with a normal medium cluster with Septic Spells and Eternal Suffering. This is a medium cluster jewel with chaos damage over time that you will need. Then we are heading to the Templar side, and here we are grabbing some more mana reservation efficiency, some armor and ES. And this dual socket, here I have my Watcher's Eye. So this is chance to block with damage over time multiplier and ES gain on hit. Honestly, you don't need all of those mods. The energy shield gain on hit is very nice, but I didn't have it in the beginning and I really didn't need it, like the shield is way more than enough to sustain your ES. So just look to cap your block and eventually whatever else you can find. And lastly we are heading down to get some more ES and armor, and the last cluster jewel, which is a large one again, always the same. And in this one I have socketed my forbidden jewels with Mistress of Sacrifice. So this Mistress of Sacrifice node is your offering skills also affect you. This is usually on a Necromancer, and the offering have 50% reduced effect, and you also have 40% skill effect duration. So I am using this jewel to trigger my Divergent Bone offering, so it gives me a ton of block, and we use that with Desecrate as well to generate some corpses. And the skill effect duration is also very nice to make the spark last longer. And finally, let's take a look at my gem setup. So as we are using the Ashes of the Star amulet, obviously a lot of the gems will be some alternate quality gems, and sometimes they can be very expensive, but you can start with some normal ones and just upgrade them as you get the currency for them. So on my wand I have the gems that I use with the Mistress of Sacrifice forbidden jewels and the trigger mod. So this has to be Desecrate to generate some corpses, and then I use Divergent Bone Offering to get a lot of chance to block attack and chance to block spell damage. And the last one is a Divergent Tempest Shield, it gives more chance to block spell damage. On my gloves I have my first aura setup, and I am using Discipline. So this is a normal one, but you can get an Anomalous version. It will give a little bit of increased damage while on full energy shield. It's one of the only alternate quality gems that I am missing right now. Then we have Purity of Ice. This doesn't need to have any alternate quality as they are useless for us. Then I have Enlighten. This doesn't have to be Anomalous, it's just because it happened that I found one level 4 and it was Anomalous. And then I have Determination. In this one you can use again an Anomalous version. It is some chance to avoid stun, but it is really not necessary as it's only a little bit. Then on my helmet I have my second aura setup, and in this one I am using a Divergent Malevolence. So Divergent gives you and nearby ally deal increased damage with ailments. Then I have an Anomalous Purity of Elements. This gives a little bit of extra aura effect. Then we are using the Divergent Herald of Agony for more chance to poison on hit, and again another Enlighten. Then on the body armor I have my main damage setup. So we are using Phantasmal Spark. This is what converts the lightning damage to chaos damage, and this is what allows you to be able to poison with Spark. Then I am using an Awakened Spell Echo, and you don't need to have an Awakened Spell Echo, you can also use an Anomalous Spell Echo which gives some cast speed. Some extra cast speed with the quality, and it is basically the same DPS as the Awakened Gem. It is very close and it's a lot cheaper. Then I am using Awaken Unbound Ailments, Awaken Elemental Focus, Awaken Void Manipulation, and lastly Anomalous Inspiration Support. So you can also use a Divergent Inspiration which reduces the mana cost even more, so that will depend if your mana is fine or not. If it's fine, you can use an Anomalous one. It will give you some extra critical strike chance, which is very nice to proc the Elemental Overload, since we don't have a lot of critical strike chance in this build. Then on the shield I have Hast with Valhast, and we are not using the aura permanently. As you can see, I am not using it. It is just for the Val version to give some more DPS on the bosses sometimes. Then we have a Flame Dash. This is normal quality for more increased cooldown recovery rate. And the last one, it is pretty important, it's an Anomalous Blood and Sand, and it gives 50% increased projectile speed when in sand stance. so it will give you a lot of approach speed and it will be very nice for the spark. And finally, on the boots I have my last aura, which is Anomalous Defiance banner. You don't need to have an Anomalous one, it is very expensive and only gives a little bit more of armor compared to a normal one. And then I am using a cast when damage taken setup, so it is max level with level 20 or 21 even if you can get, and it is an Anomalous version, so it has increased skill effect duration. Then it's linked to Molten Shell with Val Molten Shell. You don't really need to have the Val Molten Shell, it's just if you want to activate it manually sometimes. And then the last one is Anomalous Summon Lightning Golem to give some increased cast speed and increased buff effect, so more cast speed. And lastly, let's just take a look at the Ascendancy and the Pantheon. So I am using the Brine King as we have no way of dealing with the stun unless you get like 100% to Jewel implicit, which is very hard. So I am just using the Brine King, and then for the small I am using Tukohama. For the extra life regen while stationary, it is pretty much the only useful one of the small for this build. And for the Ascendancy we are just getting Malediction, Profane Bloom, Withering Presence and Void Beacon. So that's it for the build presentation. I hope it gave you a good idea of how the build is working, how to scale the damage and get your defenses in a good spot. And if you like my video and appreciate the work I am putting on them, please consider subscribing, it would help me a lot. And I wish you guys a good end of the league and good luck if you decide to try my build. Have fun guys, bye!